Thanks a lot, Marie-Michelle. It's great to see so many people here in this room today. I'm going to talk a bit in general about the challenges of the food system, and I'll focus on, it says emerging markets or developing markets. That definition is a bit unclear because we operate in quite diverse markets, from Brazil, which is pretty advanced in various areas, to Southeast Asian countries, Peru. So we have a focus on different regions. We don't do too much in Africa, but other than that, we're quite broad internationally. Interesting enough that in I would say 5 or 10 years ago, most of our presentations would be very much focused on functional foods, health benefits. And nowadays you see that there's a lot more interest in the world behind the ingredient. So people want to understand not so much what it does. Of course, they want to know what it does, but they also want to know how is it produced, what is the impact on the environment, and not only consumers, but also, let's say, the companies we work with, and those are, let's say, often mid-sized, even smaller companies. They care more, and also they need to care more because their customers are asking them for insights in how products are produced, how it's impacted the environment. Today, what I'll start with a general introduction, and then I'll just give some examples of companies and countries we're active in. And then in the end, I think we have a few more minutes for questions and discussion about the topic. Yeah, so talking about the topic of today, I think there are a few important things here. Just if you look at the nutritional part, what we see is that from a European perspective, often the future of food is a more, let's say, technological topic. It is more looking into the future. Whereas if you look at some of the markets we operate in, the future of food for a lot of consumers means how to get food today and tomorrow. So that brings a completely different challenge to the table. It's also good to know that many of the crops, let's say the staple crops that are used in large markets are under pressure. If you look at the African market, crops like corn, grains, with climate change, there's going to be a huge impact on the output of some of the crops that are most commonly used in the market right now. And you also see that political and economical conflicts and changes impact supply chains in emerging markets. And that means that basic daily food is becoming more expensive or even not accessible. An example we see, for instance, in Brazil, that people change their diets, so they can't afford certain types of meats anymore. They need to go for cheaper options, cheaper protein sources, and that's impacting the way, let's say, consumer brands need to develop their markets and also provide good solutions for daily foods. So that's one thing. And the other thing you see is that looking at the, let's say, the formulation of products, you see quite a number of changes in, let's say, the ingredients in terms of health benefits and also in terms of the, let's say, the composition on the longer term. And that means using more local crops. I'll give a few examples of that later on. Looking into ingredients that are sustainable, that have high nutritional value. So that's one of the trends you see. The other thing, and that's also a major issue, is the use of soil. So if you compare, let's say, the quality of crops now compared to 40 years ago, for instance, you see that many crops do not have the same nutritional value as, let's say, a long time ago, because the soil is getting overexplored. Let's say the nutritional value of the soil is going down, and that means that it will impact the quality of food that people eat. So that's quite, let's say, a concerning development. Also, I think, and that's relevant if you look around here at SIAL, if you look at, for instance, the innovation area, if you look at new food products, you see ingredients that were not here 5 or 10 years ago. So you see ancient grains from Africa, from South America. You see smart solution in the area of vegetables and fruits. And that means either different vegetables or vegetables used in a different way. So it means that we can offer different solutions for consumers. And that can be via different processes like fermentation, that's quite big. It can be via adding value. For instance, you see that a lot in drinks. Let's say you have a lot of shots, and those can be fruit-based, dairy-based. So consumers understand that, and they also understand, let's say, different applications. So if you come up with, let's say, pizzas, or you come up with healthy snacks based on alternative ingredients, then consumers are quite open to that. If you look at the educational part, also quite important. I think there's a major role, not only of, let's say, the industry, but also consumer brands to educate consumers about, let's say, the impact of food. I think in Holland, one interesting development right now is that the largest supermarket chain, they've committed themselves to communicate true cost of products. So that means not only the price of the product, but they also commit themselves to communicate what it costs in terms of water usage, how it impacts climate. So as a consumer, it means that you have, let's say, more information on the impact of the food that you're eating. So that's one thing. The other interesting discussion going on is right now, if you produce your food in a, let's say, responsible way, the reality is that you're forced to invest and make extra costs. So you invest in organic certificates, you may have to invest in vegan certificates. There are all types of systems available for, I would say, healthy foods, which is a good thing for a consumer because you have many options. It is only not that logical because it basically, if you do not produce, let's say, sustainable foods, if you do not have healthy ingredients, you're basically not forced to invest, let's say, in quality and belief systems. Whereas if you invest in better quality food, it requires you to have, let's say, a better traceability of your supply chain. So that there's an extra charge on top of your process to prove that you're actually healthy. And ideally, you would have the other way, the world completely turned around, where you have a system that if you do not comply with all, let's say, sustainable and healthy requirements of the consumers and of the market, then you should have an extra penalty or a cost that's involved in the process. So those are, I would say, in general, some of the topics related to sustainable value chains. And another topic which is as urgent is that right now we're producing for an X amount of people. If you look at the future, it's a bit hard to see, but you see that by 2021, we go to a world population which is up to, 10 billion inhabitants, which is a huge impact, has a huge impact. The other thing is that you would say people are, let's say, we will have more people. The issue is we will not only have more people, especially we will have more older people. So more older people means a higher pressure on society. It means a more different nutritional needs. And a very basic thing we see in some of the markets we operate is the decline of the farmer population. So young people in countries like Brazil, but also Peru, Southeast Asia, a few generations ago, they would perhaps produce rice, or they would continue the farms of their parents. Right now, you see a lot of youngsters, instead of continuing the agricultural business of their families, they opt for a tech position. So they want to develop, let's say, health techs, or they want to develop banking systems because it's more attractive, it's physically less exhausting. But it also has a huge impact on how we can provide sufficient people with food and with good food. So that's a challenge. Also, if you look at soil productivity, you see that there's sort of a limit to what you can do. Because the system is so optimized for a few major crops, it means that there's not much more you can produce with that. But it also means that you have to look into new alternatives. One of the exciting things you see right now is, for instance, the blue economy, where you can use seaweed as an alternative for protein. You see more variation of crops on different lands. And you see some ancient crops that are coming back. If you look at Europe, for instance, spelt, which was not very common 5-10 years ago, now it's quite common. So you see more diversity. And you also see that, let's say, emerging markets, they develop, let's say, new ideas on, let's say, old crops. I'm going to speed up a little bit because of time. So we're not only talking about, let's say, the quantity of food and nutrients. We also talk about major deficits that you see in different markets, but primarily, I would say, in Africa, Southeast Asia. So there are micronutrients that are, let's say, lacking. One of the things we do, as heard later, is develop some products that are enriched with minerals and specific vitamins to make sure that there's sufficient solutions for that. The cynical part is that people that lack access to good food in general also consume the wrong type of food. So not only do they lack micronutrients, but they also have a diet with excess of sugar, salts, and fats. So that works two ways. And as a consequence of that, you don't, as mentioned in the earlier slide, you don't only see that people get older, but basically people get sicker longer. So you don't live more, but you basically the last 10, 15 years of your life, a lot of people spend in bad health. So that means there's a lot of stress on the health system and also a large requirement of not only medicine, but also functional foods. It's a topic we're quite active in right now. So it's preventive medicine, where you see food as sort of the strategy in combination with lifestyle stimuli for healthy diets and also healthy lifestyles. And there's an opportunity there as well, especially in emerging markets, but also in Western markets. Yeah, a few trends that are, I think, quite relevant. So we need to look into climate resilient crops. So understanding, and that's something that's going on right now. If you look at Central America, other markets, you see that some crops do not manage a temperature change of 1-2 degrees or suffer heavily from lack of rain or excess rain. So that's something that's going to be highly important. The combination of regenerative agriculture in combination with organic. So those are interesting different approaches and often they meet each other halfway. So you can start with a regenerative concept which gets close to organic or the other way around. So there's an opportunity there. If you can combine it to a revenue model. So if you're able, and you see that in seaweed, for instance, to not only have revenues from your ingredients, but also have a carbon offset that you can sell on, let's say, on a commercial market, then that would actually stimulate farmers to move into regenerative farming and also have, let's say, a business model that on the short term provides benefits. Upcycling and waste reduction. If you look at food supply chain, if you only look within the food production chain, so without actually a product hitting the market, you see that there's a huge waste of food products, which not only is waste in terms of not being able to be consumed, but also has a huge impact on climate. If you look at the emissions, the water usage of food waste, that's enormous. And next to energy, the agricultural sector and the food sector is the major contributor to the to climate change, to carbon emissions. So there's an opportunity there. And some of the companies we work with, we primarily look into the topic of upcycling, to see can you use some of the rest streams, not only for biomass, but also for more added value ingredients. I'm going to finish with a few examples. One of the countries we've been quite active is Moldova. In introduction, we also do some, I personally do some projects for World Bank and also for some ministries. Moldova is a very interesting example, which has a very rich agriculture. It has a reputation of a very poor country. It has a country, especially before the pandemic, where basically everyone under 25 moved to the UK or to the EU or to the US for other jobs. On the other hand, it has huge potential in terms of agricultural ground. They have excellent fresh fruits, vegetables, nuts. And one of the projects we've been involved in is stimulating, let's say, local production. So not only fresh fruits, but setting up, let's say, supporting companies that produce frozen fruits, dried fruits, increase quality standards, and also have supply chains that make more sense. So if you look at prunes, dried plums from Moldova, excellent quality, and way closer to the European market, for instance, than Chile and California. So providing more infrastructure, taking advantage of high quality agricultural soils, and also providing good technology in terms of processing plants was an option and a strategic opportunity for Moldova to grow, and also to change the reputation from a very poor country in a very rich country in ingredients, in soil, and agricultural products. An example where, as a country, you can focus on, let's say, healthy foods, healthy snacks, and really contribute to the needs of the market. Another example is a brand we work with closely in Vietnam. So that's a beekeeping company. What they do is they have a whole network of beekeepers. They provide, let's say, income to a lot of families. In addition to that, they also are responsible for pollination. And pollination basically is necessary to make sure that you have fruits, you have vegetables, you have coffee. So they set up systems in combination with farmers, so coffee farms, fruit farms, to make sure that pollination would be, let's say, guaranteed. And at the same time, they provide consumer products, which are also part of social programs for schools and for minorities to have access to good food. And the next step we're working on with them is provide enriched nutrition. And that means sugar-free multivitamin candies for different age groups and also for different needs. So that means providing a whole range of products that on one hand provide income to let's say, to staff and to communities. On the other hand, understanding the nutritional needs, provide good products to the consumer markets with, let's say, additional vitamins, minerals that have positive health impact for consumers. This is quite an interesting project from Peru. It's my good friend Walter. What they do is community-based development. So what they figured out that there are lots of forests in Peru that have eatable mushrooms. And up until 10 years ago, those mushrooms were not used for consumption. So what they did is set up training programs, set up good drying centers. So provide on one hand, let's say, a workforce that had no job opportunities to provide income. And on the other hand, have, let's say, good meat alternatives, good snack alternatives based on mushrooms. Right now, those mushrooms are imported in high volumes by German, French companies because of the excellent quality. There's no pollution in it. And they also do quite a lot of studies on climate change and which crops are actually, let's say, have potential on the longer term. And that means that they set up nurseries for, let's say, herbal medicine, herbs and spices that are also developed by local communities, but then according to Western standards. And that means that those are, let's say, have a positive impact on soil, create, let's say, benefits for, let's say, communities, but also for consumers, and can be used via technology in different ways, so as herbs and spices, but also as preservatives in meat products. So there's quite a lot of innovation behind that as well. This is Satoria, a customer from Indonesia. What they do is, although they, I would say, they're a large-scale company, but they also have a mission. One of their missions is to reduce sugar consumption. So what you see, especially in, let's say, people with lower incomes, that they go for sugar-rich products like biscuits and candies. What they've done is invest in local, let's say, crops, mainly cassava. So go away from, let's say, other sources of starch. Use cassava, use specific, let's say, non-digestible fiber that has, let's say, a pleasant flavor, and they use that for their biscuit production. So that allows them to provide accessible biscuits to, let's say, lower-end markets. And they also work together with, let's say, government agency to provide functional products for groups of special needs. So one of the products is a biscuit for pregnant women. So they found that pregnant women in Indonesia had specific deficits in folic acids, for instance, and some other vitamins. So what they did is produce an accessible cookie, have a good distribution system via the health system, and with that provide both, let's say, cassava-based, let's say, locally sourced product, but also solve one of the nutritional needs of society.
So now you've got the choice either to present, either to get the question.
I think I'll leave it for the question because I have a few more cases, but we can do it maybe one-to-one afterwards. I think this is mainly the core of it.
Yeah, thank you, because it'd be interesting if somebody has a question, if you don't mind. So we had a question right here. Here you go, sir.
So speaking about food and emerging countries, what is, according to you, the role of affordability and accessibility that emerging countries can play?
Yeah, I think one of the advantages is access to quite a lot of agricultural capacity. If you look at agricultural land, I think there's an opportunity for new crops. Example, for instance, is quinoa. We work quite closely with the sector in Peru. That used to be a crop that you wouldn't even feed your chicken because basically there was no market for it. People liked potatoes, rice, beans. And now you see that because of demand from Europe, from the US, you see that quinoa now has become, let's say, a product with commercial value. So you can see new crops that are rich in nutrients. And those can be proteins, it's going to be fibers. So there's an opportunity there. And also, if you look at the future, most people actually live in developing markets, Southeast Asia, Africa, South America. The largest number of the population lives in those countries. And of course, let's say the income that people have in those countries is lower than in Europe. So if you can, let's say, organize your supply chain efficiently, it means that you can feed local people. But then also you can sort of enrich the diets of, let's say, Western markets. In some cases, that also means that some of those crops come back to Europe. For instance, quinoa right now, you see quite a lot of production in Western Europe, which was traditionally the same. Crops like tomato and potatoes also came from other countries, rice, and now completely integrated. So one thing is experience with providing affordable people with lower incomes. And the other thing is basically the richness of agricultural grounds and learning. It's also a learning environment how to deal with climate change.
Okay, thank you. We've got a quick last one, please.
A very quick one. Do you think that with the coming year inflationary pressure on the food staples in developing countries, the initiatives that you are presenting might be slowed down because consumers will focus on just affordable, cheap food?
In some cases, let's say, if you talk about, let's say, highly trendy top-end products, for sure there will be an impact. On the other hand, some of the initiatives, let's say, reduction of food waste, upcycling. So let's say that the last case you see on the slide here, that's a company, what they've done, they produce essential oils, but they found that a lot of the rest materials they have can actually be used for other products, let's say beer production, tea production. So I think in general, the demand from, let's say, the market is not going to change. I think what I like in some of the mid-sized companies and smaller sized companies, I see initially a lot of the innovation came from large companies. And now you see all the smaller and mid-sized companies looking for ways either to be more efficient, to use more material, and also think about the quality of the raw material. So how can we use our biodiversity to come up with, let's say, affordable products? Because if they're not profitable in their own country, it's even more difficult to be affordable and profitable in other countries.